Some disclaimers before we begin. 1. There may be some background noise, and 2. This is being recorded live, so I expect some mistakes. Chapter 4. Harmless. Joe. What I don't understand, Principal of course is saying as he crossed his good leg over his bad one, is why you couldn't tell people what was going on. We've all seen movies, Seth. They have actors, scripts. If you know the ship on screen isn't really sinking, does that make Titanic any less sad? Seth took in a quick breath. He looked like he was struggling to keep his composure. Principal Gorse, come on. The principal looked at the rest of us. Me, Frank, and Officer Olaf, who had been sent in when the Bayport PD heard that we'd learned something about the bank robbery, for support. I think what he's trying to say, I jumped in, is that real emotions are always more interesting to watch than fake ones. That's part of the appeal, that there is no script. Anything could happen. Seth looked at me and smiled. Exactly. I was performing a cinematic experiment. How would people react when they were put in these crazy, seemingly dangerous situations? What would happen? And what happened in this case, Officer Olaf said, moving from his spot leaning against the front of Principal Gorse's desk, was awfully lucky for you, Seth. Nobody got hurt, nobody panicked and had a heart attack. He paused, standing right in front of Seth, looking down at him with serious brown eyes, running his fingers over his droopy moustache. But you realise that was just luck, don't you? Seth looked up at Officer Olaf, defiant. I could tell he wasn't going to back down. I didn't hurt anybody, Officer Olaf. It was never my intention to hurt anybody. It was just a harmless prank. Frank, who was sitting next to me on a bench against the wall, huffed. But you did kind of rob a bank, he pointed out. Seth glared at him, surprised. I did not, he insisted. I staged a bank robbery, but we gave everything back. But in that moment, Frank said, getting to his feet, I and everybody else in that bank really believed we might die, make the wrong move, and you could have shot us full of holes. I'm sure lots of people were wondering whether they would make it out of the bank alive. Seth frowned. He looked down at the floor for a second, then back into Frank's eyes. I told him afterward that it was just a joke. But what if something had gone wrong? Principal Gorse asked. He leaned across his desk. Seth, you don't seem to get it here. Bank robberies are serious business. People panic. They act violently if they think it will save their lives. They feel terror that doesn't go away just because you leave a note saying it was only a joke. Seth shifted uncomfortably, but his expression didn't change. I take risks for my art, he said simply. Officer Olaf sighed and turned to Principal Gorse. Do you want to tell him what his punishment from you is? Because I'm about ready to take this kid down to the station house and straighten him out there. Seth frowned again. Now he was looking a little nervous. I'm being charged with a crime? He asked. Principal Gorse took a deep breath and said, Seth, I'm afraid I have no choice but to suspend you for 3 days for cyberbullying your fellow students. Seth jumped to his feet. Cyberbullying? He cried. What? Principal Gorse gestured to Frank and me. These two gentlemen were in your video. Seth glared at me. But they weren't even... I'm afraid of school policy. Seth bit his lips, still glaring. He looked from me to Frank to Principal Gorse. This is... But Officer Olaf didn't let him finish. Now you have to come with me, Seth, he said, standing up. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say? Officer Olaf continued to reset his Miranda rights as Seth looked from him to Principal Gorse, stammering. But I didn't... Criminal mischief, Officer Olaf said, moving close enough to Seth to wave a pair of handcuffs in his face. You created a major disruption this weekend, Seth, diverting the police force and panicking citizens. I get you didn't really rob a bank, but it turns out pretending to rob a bank is pretty bad too. He jingled the cuffs again. I'd rather not use these. Think you could walk out with me like a big boy? No trouble? Seth was still glaring at Officer Olaf, but his lower lip was starting to wobble. He took one last look around the room, and when he spotted me, his face flushed with anger. Darn it, Joe! I thought you liked my videos. I thought you were cool. I sighed. I did feel bad for the kid. In his warped way, he was pretty talented. Listen, Seth, if putting me in cuffs and making me hitchhike back from miles out of town, not to mention the whole issue of having to rob my brother, if that's how you treat a fan, I'd hate to see what you do to your enemies. I paused and tried to smile, but Seth wasn't having it. I gave up. Seriously, dude, you went too far. Seth pulled his lips tight, then turned and allowed Officer Olaf to lead him out of the office. The officer nodded at Principal Gorse on the way out. Thanks, Hank, he said. glancing briefly at me and my brother. "Boys." Then he turned his head and walked out the door, and he and Seth were gone. Principal Gorse sighed. "Sometimes, boys," he said, "I think the world is changing too fast for me. Can either of you explain the appeal of that movie to me? Watching people get scared out of their minds for no real purpose." He shook his head and shrugged. "I think it's about shock, sir," I said. "In this day and age, we've been desensitized to trauma, crime, horrific happenings. It takes more and more to shock your audience. Look at movies like Saw or Hostel. They go much further than the classic Hitchcockian horror of the past." Principal Gorse nodded, looking bemused. "So the next natural step," I went on, "the final frontier, if you will, is real emotion. Instead of trying to shock his audience, that is allowing them to share in the real shock of his unknowing participants." Principal Gorse blinked. He was a nice guy, really, dressed like he always was in his slouchy cardigan sweater, along with his usual corduroy pants and brown shoes. He had a kindly face, sort of messy brown hair and glasses. He looked like a kind of hippie-ish high school principal. A youngish man, maybe only 40 years old, except that he also worked for the fancy hand-carved cane, which was the result of a bad skiing accident 5 years earlier. You would probably have been able to pick out Mr. Gorse's car in the teacher's parking lot just by looking at him. It was an orange 1970s Carman Ghia. Pure beatnik. Even its engine, it made a singular put-put-put sound. Reminded you of him, so that wherever you were in Bayport, if he was passing anywhere within earshot, you were aware of him through that unique put-put-put. "There goes Mr. Gorse," you would say to yourself. We considered Mr. Gorse a friend. He'd been my band teacher at middle school. I knew he liked us. He'd been really nice to Frank and me when the deal was being negotiated. Now he tilted his head, giving us both a concerned look. "How are things going, Hardy boys?" he asked. "I understand the legal problems you boys have had this past year. As a matter of fact, I received a note from the State Board of Education about you both." Joe and I shifted uncomfortably in our chairs. Mr. Gorse opened the letter and started reading. "Apparently, I understand that, as a part of a plea agreement with the State Attorney General, you are both subject to instant recourse." He looked up at us. "I guess that's a little bit like probation." He continued reading. "Which, if you're found to engage in any kind of independent amateur law enforcement type activities, will result in the pair of you being sent to," here he brought the letter close to his eyes, "the Jadoob School for Behavior Modification Therapy on Rock Island." He wasn't telling us anything we didn't know, but it was not pleasant to hear it spoken out loud. "Are you meeting regularly with your legal advisor?" he asked. Joe and I nodded. Our lawyer was Uncle Ben. Ben Hardy, our dad's brother, a Hartford tax attorney who had been given the thankless job of dealing with all the legal problems we'd accrued in the last year. "Good. Well, what I wanted to say to you is that all this stuff," he waved at the letter, "it doesn't change anything as far as I'm concerned. The world needs fighters, boys. People with the courage to stand up for what's right. But you can't accomplish your goals if you're locked up in juvenile hall or if your transcripts show half a dozen suspensions. Am I right?" We nodded. "Just remember, I'm in your corner, and my door is open, day and night." Just then his door actually opened. "Oh, I'm sorry," a woman said. It was Yukiko Collins, one of the school's art teachers. Mr. Gorse brightened. It was rumoured that he and Miss Collins were dating. Nobody wanted to pry on account of Mr. Gorse being a widower. His wife had died in a skiing accident that had broken his leg. But Joe and I liked the idea of Mr. G and Miss C being an item because they were our two favourite people at Bayport High. "That's all right, Miss Collins," Mr. Gorse said, rising to his feet, a smile on his face. "We were finished here." As we passed outside, Miss Collins smiled. She always wore crazy, mismatched clothing with horizontal stripes and men's hats, and today was no exception. Everybody loved Miss Collins. She was one of those teachers who had the knack for always making you feel enthused and entertained. Joe and I had our own reasons for loving her. She had written the recommendation letter that kept us from being sent to the reform school Mr. Gorson mentioned, Jadoob, a really notorious place on a tiny isolated island 20 miles out to sea. All kinds of rumours existed about the place, rumours about strange behaviour modification therapies, with names like Swarm and Funhouse Mirror. It was also rumoured that several kids died each year trying to escape. Today Miss Collins seemed troubled. "I hope you boys are careful about taking on your cell phones," she said. "Or talking on your cell phones." Smiling at this haphazard warning, I said, "You don't believe that stuff about that causing brain cancer, do you, Miss Collins?" "No, but I think mine's been hacked or something." That sounded odd. I wanted to ask her more about it, but Mr. Gorse invited her in. She said goodbye to us with that same uneasy air, and the door shut behind them. In the lobby, Principal Gorse's secretary, Connie, smiled and held up 2 green light passes. "How's Trudy, boys?" Connie knew Aunt Trudy from their gardening club. Together they helped make an untended plot in the back of the school into an overgrowing vegetable garden. The cafeteria even used the fresh veggies in its daily special. I don't think you could tell, really. If only Aunt Trudy would teach some cooking classes down there. "She's good," Frank said with a smile. "We'll tell her you say hi." Connie nodded. "I'd appreciate that. Have a good day, boys." A little quick side note before you continue. I think there's a typo because this chapter is read by Joe, but for some reason it says Joe and I a lot instead of Frank and I, but then in the next paragraph it says Frank and I. So yeah, I think there's been a little bit of a printing problem there. Anyway, let's continue. I'm not sure Connie needed to bother with the late passes. Frank and I both had study hall in the cafeteria next with Coach Goethe, who barely glanced at the passes before grabbing them out of her hat and gesturing vaguely at the rows of tables. "Take a seat." Coach Goethe was rumored to have lost 80% of his hearing in the Vietnam War, which made him the perfect teacher for study hall. The din regularly reached rock concert levels. It was literally impossible to get any work done in there unless your work involved studying the effects of loud noises on hearing over time. Frank and I sat at a table in the back, and Frank put out a notebook. "So," he began, "about the speech. Yo, hardy boys." I looked up to see Sherelle Bunyan standing over us. Well, looming over us is more like it. She was the queen of pep. Although she was an old friend of mine from junior high, we drifted apart in high school. She was very popular. Not that we were unpopular, but she was definitely in the alpha group. It was actually nice to see her. She had the same red curly hair she'd had as a kid, only now she wore her cheerleader uniform with the Bayport High colours of green and gold and the school mascot, Bill the Bulldog, pictured snarling on the front. "Hey, Sherelle, long time no see. What's up?" "I was hoping," she said, "that you guys will be able to volunteer for the blood drive." She sat down next to us. As she did, she accidentally dropped a clipboard she was carrying. It clattered to the floor. "Shoot!" She picked it up and dusted it off and held it out under our noses. Apparently we had no choice but to sign up. Ball of energy is how people used to describe her in junior high. I saw that the description was still applicable. Sure, Sherelle. Yeah, we're always happy to bleed for a good cause." We started to add our names to the list when she spoke to us under her breath. As she did, her whole demeanour changed. She sounded panicky. "Look, guys, I need your help," she whispered. Something about her mood was contagious. We lowered our voices to match hers and kept our heads down. "What kind of help?" Frank asked. "You know, with a mystery." A mystery! There it was! You have no idea how a reputation as a teenage detective can complicate your life. Frank started to answer, but I gave him a nudge. He picked up on my wariness and stayed silent. The truth was, although it sounded harmless and kind of fun, this wasn't an innocent topic for us anymore. There were serious consequences for us involved with anything remotely connected to sleuthing. Consequences that Frank and I didn't talk about because, well, we didn't like to think about them. Not that they would stop us, but we still had to be more careful now than we used to be. "Why ask us?" I said cautiously. "Oh, come on," Sherelle said. "Don't give me that. Everybody knows you guys are like Sherlock squared. You're both packing heat, right?" "Don't believe everything you hear, Sherelle." "Well, anyway, I need help. Or, well, Neil needs help." She was the only person in school who did not refer to her older brother as Neanderthal Bunyan. Yes, the same charming fellow who'd introduced Frank to his impending internet fame this morning. He was also the star linebacker of the BHS football team. "Is he alright? Something happened to him?" "Yes, he's fine, more or less, physically at least, but..." She glanced around the hall. Clearly she was uneasy discussing this out in the open. "Look, I'm going to ask for a bathroom pass. Can you guys follow me and we can talk about it out by the vending machines?" It would be quieter there. Apparently the blood drive had been a cover story to make contact with us. She got up to lead us out of the cafeteria. I was cautious but curious. I started to follow her, but Frank said, "I'll meet you there in 5. Sherelle seemed puzzled. She looked like she wanted to say something, but instead she just nodded and walked off. Frank watched her go up to Coach Goethe, get her pass and head out the door. Then he turned to me, his expression dark. "Neanderthal Bunyan, asking us for help," he said. "That doesn't seem odd to you?" The truth was it did. It was 6 or 7 months ago, before we had to retire. Joe and I had tracked down a drug ring. What we didn't know or anticipate was a series of busts around town that would follow the consequences of our investigation, including the arrest of the former star linebacker for the Bayport High School football team, Neil Neanderthal Bunyan, All-State 3 years running, who had apparently been abusing steroids. Neanderthal Bunyan had good reason to enjoy seeing Frank and me humiliated. Would he even accept our help? Let's just be careful, Frank suggested. It might be a challenge in some classes for two brothers to get bathroom passes for simultaneous bathroom trips, but fortunately Coach Goethe had stopped caring a long time ago, possibly before we were born. He grabbed 2 passes from a big coffee can he kept on his desk and waved us away. We found Sherelle waiting where she said she'd be, by the vending machines. Frank and I took a seat on either side of her. So what's going on with Neanderthal? I said. Okay, she said in an excited whisper. This, totally insane thing has been happening.